Good evening. Welcome to the lecture series. I'm Mark Robbins, the Dean of the School of Architecture. Welcome to our students and to our guests. Tonight's lecture actually grew out of a discussion that we had had with some of the members of SMAD, our Society for Multicultural Architects and Designers. And so I would like to recognize SMAD and thank them for all of their help, both hosting our speaker and showing him around the school. And I'd like to give them a round of applause. Would you all raise your hand, those of you who worked on this? Thank you. And we happen to share a friend in common who's a painter in North Carolina. So I had known about Phil's work actually long before I saw it. The Freelon Group had an entry and was on the short list for the Motown Museum in Detroit. And I remember seeing the project then, and my friend Beverly saying, "So, you have to get this project." You know. Phil Freelon is a principal in the Freelon Group in Durham, North Carolina, which was founded in 1990. It now has 56 total staff, including 20 architects and 19 lead accredited professionals. The firm focuses on college and university projects, as well as transportation, aviation, and projects in the cultural sector. Phil's work has been published in national professional journals, including Architecture Magazine, Progressive Architecture, Contract Magazine, as well as Metropolis and Met Home. He's also a designer of furniture, and this design has been recognized with a first prize in the PPG Furniture Design Competition, and he's also received a contract with Herman Miller, the furniture company in Zeeland, Michigan. The Freelon Group has received 26 AIA Design Awards, both regional, state, and local, and has also received a North Carolina AIA Outstanding Firm Award in 2001. Phil has been an adjunct professor at the College of Design in North Carolina State and has been a visiting critic and lecturer at Harvard, MIT, the University of Maryland and Utah, and CCA and Kent State. In 1989, Phil was a recipient of a Loeb Fellowship and spent a year of independent study at the GSD at Harvard, and will be returning to the classroom in Cambridge, but at the other school at MIT to teach a seminar on design-centered practice. The Freelon Group is committed to innovative design as well as the stewardship of our environment, and the firm has consciously focused its work to the types of clients and projects that ultimately serve the greater good, both locally and nationally. Their portfolio, for instance, doesn't include prisons or jails or strip shopping centers or the host of other building types that aren't consistent with their mission. But rather, the firm consistently prefers to opt for projects that have an impact on education and the advancement of understanding between disparate cultures and the expressive potential of the arts. Recent projects that make these larger intentions evident include the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco and the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland, African American History and Culture in Baltimore, as well as cultural facilities in New Orleans and Charlotte, North Carolina. The firm has projects with university clients such as Yale University and the multiple campuses at the University of North Carolina system. Phil Freelon has worked with the National Organization of Minority Architects and began a chapter, and the ethical dimension of architecture and its role in the construction of identity is never very far from his body of work. It's with great pleasure that I welcome Phil Freelon.
Thank you, Dean Robbins. I hope this mic isn't too loud. It's a little uncomfortable for me, but perhaps folks in the back can hear better with the mic on. Is it a little loud? Good? That's good. Well, I want to thank Dean Robbins for inviting me back. I was here back in May as part of the jury team for the master's thesis and really enjoyed that environment and that system. Thought the work was excellent, and so I'm glad to be back. I want to thank SMAT as well for bringing our work to the attention of this school. I understand a couple of the students that I got in contact with aren't even here. They're in London this semester, so please tell them that I made it. I also want to thank Scott and Sylvia who have shown me around the city, been very gracious hosts, and I'm really enjoying my stay here in Syracuse. Dean Robbins talked a little bit about this, but I want to say more about our practice and why we do what we do and the importance of having a vision and mission in establishing an architectural firm. The course Dean Robbins mentioned at MIT, I'm teaching this fall, really focuses on design-centered practice and the notion that practice, for its own sake, is meaningless if it's not forwarding the highest values of design. And so in that course we really talk about that as the driving force, design, but also strengthening the connection between the profession and academia, which in some institutions, not this one, but others, I feel like it's really pulled too far apart. And the profession and the academia really need to come together. There's a lot to be learned in both directions. We also focus in that course on channeling creativity. And this thing that we do is create an adventure called architecture. It's really a team sport. It's about collaboration. How do we do that? How do you take creativity, which is this ephemeral thing, and try and channel that into built work? And so, while this evening's lecture is going to be primarily about our work, I will stop along the way and talk about process, talk about the ideas, how they were generated, and how our firm goes about delivering our work. Because when you think about it, the mission that Dean Robbins alluded to, and I'll read it for you, so I think it's important. Our mission at the Freelon Group is to deliver innovative and inspiring design through collaboration and stewardship of our environment. And for us, it's important internally for those who are working at the Freelon Group, working with the Freelon Group, to understand what it's all about, but also externally, so our clients really know where our strengths lie and where our values are. And so it also makes a lot of sense from a marketing perspective to really focus in on a few things that you can do very well, as opposed to trying to be all things to all people. And so there are the projects that we're drawn to by way of our values, but also the ones that we avoid intentionally. All right, the last thing I'll do before talking about the work is I'd like to read a couple of quotes that I came across many years ago that really resonated with me and have informed our work over the years. One is by Charles Eames and the other is by Harris Saarinen. First Saarinen, who said, "I believe very strongly that the whole field of design is all one thing. Therefore, my interest in furniture." Eames said, "I think of myself officially as an architect. I can't help but look at the problems around us as problems of structure, and structure is architecture." Those two architects are certainly prominent in built form, but also in furniture. And I want to start by talking about a couple of pieces of furniture. The Pittsburgh Plate Glass PPG design competition was established some years ago to help to promote a new product that they had developed called Starfire Glass. This was a glass that is very, very clear. You know, when you're looking at a pane of glass, sometimes you can see a greenish or a blue tint along the edge. And all glass up to that point had a certain tint to it. And this is particular Starfire Glass was very clear, and they thought it would be a great application for furniture. So there was a competition to launch this new project, this new product for the application in furniture. And remember the time of setting up my practice was in the early 90s. There really wasn't a whole lot going on, Dean Robbins, as you recall. The recession had hit. And so architects were looking for other ways of exercising their design. And so in the context of the early 90s, our firm was young, maybe 2 or 3 people, and we had some time. There weren't a whole lot of commissions. So here's a competition, let's enter that. And I resurrected an idea I had as a student for a table. And the genesis of this idea was 2 trees coming up and supporting a canopy, which would be the tabletop. And so the notion of incorporating this new glass product into this concept was really explored. And so in plan, if you were to look down on the glass top, a square, and you double that square, and to begin to section it off into a grid, the 2 trunks, let's say, of the tree are the squares in the center of the grid. And then the branches would come up and engage a similar grid, but exploded out to a larger dimension. And if you move the squares in, but keep the trunks where they were, it becomes an asymmetric formation of 2 tree limbs coming up. And each dot in the larger grid has a corresponding dot in the smaller grid where the branches come down to the ground. And if you were just to look at the 4 corners of each of the stalks, it would explode in that manner. In perspective from below, you can see the concept of the 4 corners coming up, and if you fill in that grid, the structure of the table is revealed. At the tabletop, there's a detail punctuating the termination point with a black granite insert, so that there's a grid at the top, and the glass is etched or sandblasted to give a diffused appearance. From below, we see the tree branches coming up and exploding to engage the grid above. From the side elevation, and from the top, the intricacy of the structure is diffused as it disappears through the light and the sandblasting. This entry won first prize in the national competition, and it got the attention of Herman Miller for furniture design, who engaged this next furniture project. Once again, using the natural form as the launch point for the idea, I started thinking about the rib cage and the spinal column as the metaphor for a side chair was the contract here. And in recent years, this sort of approach has been called biomimicry. I didn't know it was called that, but using the principles from nature to help solve modern day problems. And so the spinal column moving up from the ground and embracing the seated person with a rib-like structure forms the idea for this piece. Now, a funny thing happened on the way to mass production. Our firm got busy, thankfully, and architectural commissions started coming in. And one of the early projects, this is a before shot. Again, we were maybe 4 or 5 people in the firm doing the kind of schoolwork that we could find. And this was for an elementary school. Their media center looked like this before, and we were hired to renovate their library media center. And this was for children of the very youngest age in school, from kindergarten up through the 3rd grade in a rural community. And so they were expecting, paint and finish and new furniture and be done with it. Well, we had a little bit of fun with this project. This was one of the first cases where we interviewed our clients, the kids, to find out what was their favorite story. And it was the runaway bunny. And for children of that age who are just beginning to read, we wanted to find, create a library environment, media center environment that was exciting for them, that got them worked up and thrilled about the idea of reading. And so the first 2 pages from the Runaway Bunny become the door into the media center. It's a simulated book. Now the client didn't pay any extra for that, they didn't ask for that, but we, as you'll see in some of our other work years later, we believe that a building or a project ought to look like what it is. It ought to speak to the problem or the issue or the opportunity. Inside of the media center is the cover of the book, The Runaway Bunny. And we could have picked a circulation desk out of the catalog, but we took the book theme a little bit further, and their second favorite book was Winnie the Pooh. And we ended up with happy clients who were participants in the design process. And that becomes a recurring theme for our work, as you'll see. Taking cues, listening, engaging the client, making them part of the collaborative process. Another one of our early projects was the Durham Solid Waste Operations Facility. Sounds real sexy, right? What a great opportunity, yeah, right. Well, they had this notion that this old incinerator building had been fallow and empty for about 20 years, from the mid-60s to the mid-80s, when they stopped, wised up and stopped burning trash. And so they said, well, look, we have this site, it's a beautiful site, it's no longer used for incineration. Let's level the building and build us our new administrative offices for the trash folks and the solid waste people. And, we looked at the building, yeah, it's in bad shape. But we got to thinking, wouldn't it be a great example for the trash department of the town I live in to use this building as an example of recycling, sustainability. And it was a hard sell. The head of the solid waste department wanted the new building. My son's in the audience. He worked for solid waste one summer in the administrative side. He wasn't picking up trash. But we finally convinced our client that we could do something with this, and it wouldn't cost any more than a new building, probably a little less. But as you can see, a lot of work had to be thought about and done, including mitigation of all sorts of hazardous materials. And so that footprint was just a bar-shaped building. And we determined from our programming that it really wasn't big enough to satisfy all the programmatic needs, and that we would need to add some space. And so we added an auditorium for training, new entry, and an elevator. And we decided to keep the stacks, the smokestacks. And so the plan, in a way, the auditorium is working as a cylindrical form in that composition, and bringing in a conical-shaped entry piece with a very simple plan. The director's office at the top, conference, toilets, and then support staff, and very straightforward scheme. And so the renovation began. We retained the smokestacks as this sculptural element in the landscape, and a reminder of what the building had been, and what it is now. Everything in that building was stripped away except for the brick. And so very, very simple materials, corrugated metal, nothing expensive at all, but used in an imaginative way, all new windows, all new roof structure on this beautiful site that was once burning trash. There's your elevator poking through the backside, and the entry. This project is not only a multiple award winner, American Institute of Architects at the state and local level, but was also published in Contract magazine for the interiors of all things. We also thought it was cool that inside of the building, you can look out and see these stacks as well. So the client really loved it. And another thing we did for them is during that the rising of the Phoenix out of the ashes, we documented the process of construction, demolition and construction. And so there's a sequence of photographs along this wall that tells the story of revitalizing this old building. Another sort of step in our evolution, and Dean Robbins mentioned aviation work. We've done airport terminals. This one is actually a parking deck that is quite enormous. It's about 8,000 cars in between two airport terminals at the Durham Airport. And so how do you begin to organize the movement and help people understand where to go? Nowadays, even before 9/11, but certainly after, going to the airport is a stressful situation. And you know, what can you do to help wayfinding and help alleviate some of those feelings of anxious arrival and departure? And so that first phase, it's all built now, but what I'm going to show you is the first phase here. It's highlighted since these slides, the entire deck has been built. It included an underground tunnel connecting the terminal that was on higher ground, and then it was on-grade entry at the other end to the terminal that was lower on the site. And what we did, because we wanted it to be clear that the plates where you park are flat, and so that you're not parking on sloped ramps. And so the ramping is all on these helical ramps. And in order to do that in our part of the world and here too, you've got to cover that upper deck because there's ice and snow that happens. And so we knew we needed a cover, but what can we do with that cover to make it apparent that this is the way up and down and to draw folks who are driving to those locations. And so we created what we affectionately call these upside down witches hats, which are it's fabric, it's Teflon coated fabric stretched across steel at the top of cables leading down. It gathers the rainwater as well and dissipates that at the bottom. But it creates an iconic image for a pretty pedestrian type building that often doesn't get this kind of attention. And then in the center, we want people to get out of their cars and come to one point, and you go down the escalator, down the elevators to moving sidewalks and out to the two terminals. Very, very clear movement. Poured in place concrete is not something that's common in our area, but we got some good workmanship here and pay close attention to the concrete detailing as well. And the fabric structure seems to be opaque during the day, but at night it's translucent, and the entire canopy over that central portion is aglow at night, as you can see here. This parking garage has won also multiple AIA design awards. It's kind of unusual for a parking deck. And this work, in a way, prepared us and was leading up to and gave us the kind of visibility that caught the attention of the cultural center type clients and museum clients that were looking for iconic imagery, folks that listen, for designers who are looking beyond the obvious solution. And it had a direct connection to some of our opportunities that came after. I'm going to talk now about two of our recently completed museum projects, and spend a little time too talking, as I mentioned before, about the process and the ideas that went into it. In Baltimore, the Retina Museum is right in the Inner Harbor. And those of you who've been there know that there's quite a bit of vibrant retail along the waterfront. The aquarium is here, a very nice facility. We've got continued development moving to the east over time. And as that happens, our site is becoming more and more central to the vibrancy of this harbor area of Baltimore. And there was some discussion with the owners, and again, it took some persuasion, but there was a contingent of our ownership group that wanted the museum in other places. They wanted it in the community, or they wanted it, didn't think this was a great site, and we had to be, once again, convincing that they wanted to be in the mainstream and close to other cultural institutions. Little Italy is here. There are other museum type functions close by. The Black House Museum is here. And so we thought that right on the corner of Pratt Street, the main street along the waterfront, and President Street, which is the termination of the interstate artery, would give us great visibility. And the challenge was it's a very small site. And the museum is about 90,000 square feet program. And it meant that we had to kind of go vertically with this. And in our museum work, we find that there are a lot of things that want to go on the ground level, right? You want your museum shop there, you want your cafe, you want your lobby there, your assembly type spaces all want to be close to the entry on the ground floor. So one of our challenges was how do you begin to stack things and make that work vertically. Now, in dealing and talking with the board of directors and the museum institution, we began to notice in their prevailing concepts certain ideas and concepts and words that seem to be at odds with each other, like violence and tension. That certainly is part of the African American experience in Maryland and in this country, but also vibrancy and self-expression, very positive things. There was rigidity and oppression, but also stability and balance. And so we began to see these conflicting issues and a dichotomy of the positive and the negative that really does begin to express the African American presence in this country. And so how can we begin to express that in the architecture? Once again, I feel that the building ought to have something to say about what it is, as opposed to just being a beautiful envelope housing exhibits or whatever. There needs to be a connection to the themes and the stories. And so we took our first cue from the colors of the Maryland flag, which are black, red, and gold. This museum is about African American Marylanders. It's not about everyone in the country, so it's focused on just those African Americans in Maryland and their accomplishments and their contributions. So we thought using the colors of the American flag was a good start, and that partie began to develop of a small footprint, a box, if you will, and an intervention that could represent that strife, that tension, but it can also represent joy and vibrancy at the same time. And is there a way to begin, for the building to begin to talk about those concepts and the realization of the built form? And the gold in the center is sunlight, bringing natural light into the core of the building. There are literally thousands of drawings that are leading up to kind of what I'm about to show you, so we don't have a lot of time, but I did want to pause and talk about how the idea of this museum was informed by the institution and the issues and stories that they wanted to tell. So if you remember our small footprint here, we knew that we couldn't fit everything on the first floor. We certainly have to have some mechanical shipping and receiving, some back of the house things. And we knew that we wanted the entrance to be at that very busy and vibrant corner. And so that intervention is cutting through in an organic way, in a curved way, into this orthogonal geometry and opening up an atrium, a light well through the center of the building, terminating in the vertical transportation of the elevators. You have your museum shop here and the cafe on the other side, which means that the main lobby's got to be upstairs. There isn't any room for it. And so on the second level, excuse me, that was the site plan. This is the first level. On the second level, we have the main lobby. So the movement of people vertically becomes very important. It's not just connecting point A to point B. We wanted to make the path along that travel to be significant. And so it's along that intervention, it's along that atrium that people move vertically to the main lobby on the second floor in the multi-purpose space and the traveling exhibits, the changing exhibits. And then moving again vertically, this is a two-story space, so there's a mezzanine here, and then the inaugural or permanent exhibit is actually on the third floor. So you've got to get people up. Certainly the handicapped can use the elevators, but we wanted that ascension, if you will, to be an important piece of our design through that atrium. The fourth floor offered opportunities for views back toward the harbor. That's where your administration is, and some rental space for events, some quite nice views there. And the Resource Center Library is also on the fourth floor. And then finally, collection storage is at the top. Being a harbor city, the water table is quite high, so we really couldn't put storage in any sort of basement structure. All right, so looking at the corner, here's the black box and the red intervention cutting in, and the gold, three colors of the Maryland flag, and black granite. That curved wall cutting in to the lobby, opening up to the five-story atrium. In a museum function, you really want your retail at the front door. That's kind of important for revenue generation. You want to catch them coming in and catch them going out, get them to buy things. And so that's right by the front door. Now that wall actually splits open to create the stair that connects you up to the other two levels where the important things are going on. And so we wanted that to be, even though it was a narrow vertical space, we wanted it to feel more open. So that metal wall, that intervention, actually changes to perforated metal, creating almost a veil effect, but in essence extending the spatial aspect of the space and sharing light and views through the wall, depending on your perspective. And so this atrium is fairly narrow, but you can see that it feels more open because that wall is perforated and penetrated. So as you come up through, that feeling of ascension through the red wall is beginning to really create a dynamic environment for the visitors. This is the main lobby space on the second floor. One of the interesting things about this project, for me, architecturally, was that the building was finished in the fall of '04. The exhibits were still being installed for another 6 months or so. And the very first event right in this space that occurred was the Maryland AIA had their state AIA design awards in our space. And so architects were the first people to get into the building and look at it. And then the very next year, this building won top design awards from the same body, the Maryland State AIA. And so, creating that tension, working with elements that are specific to the location and themes that are specific to the institution. You can see the overlook back toward the harbor, and in the retail area and also the main lobby, we wanted the folks on the street level to see that activity. You can see some transparency. But you'll notice on the third floor, where the main exhibit is, there aren't any windows all the way around the building, no windows. You want to control light for two reasons. First, there are multimedia type exhibits there that would be disrupted by natural light, direct light. And secondly, there are often exhibits that have textile components or natural materials that would degrade with UV exposure. So you want to control light there. And at that upper level on the balcony, those are some of the views that you have back toward the harbor. So this building also has won AIA Design Awards in North Carolina as well. Now from a very big museum 90,000 square feet, the largest African-American themed museum on the East Coast. We're going to the West Coast now, to a very small museum, 20,000 square feet. MOAD is the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. And initially, I went out to San Francisco to help the city really put together their RFP for the architect and for the designer, for the planner, gratis. I flew out there, I worked with some people I had met through associations, the African American Museum Association, and that was good time spent. It was a good investment because we helped tailor the RFP, and we certainly submitted for the pre-design work and the programming. And we were successful, and we were hired to plan the museum. This is a case where it's different from Maryland, where they already had a board of directors, they already had an institution that was in place for about 4 or 5 years. This is a brand new idea, and a new facility, and a new installation. And so part of our work with the stakeholders in the community was to figure out, what is this theme going to be? And the idea that San Francisco is sort of this international city that's very diverse, and it draws all sorts of people. The notion of the diaspora came into play. And for those who are unfamiliar with the word, it really comes from Greek, meaning to scatter from, to sow, breaking up and scattering of a people settled from their ancestral homeland. And we thought, well, this is a small facility, but a big idea. What are we going to do with this? And the exhibits are really leveraging technology. It's not really a collection of anything. It's a collection of, not of artifacts, but of stories. And it starts with the notion that if we believe the African diaspora affords an amazing opportunity to show the interconnectedness of all people. And we know from fairly recent discoveries that humanity itself began somewhere near Ethiopia, where Lucy or whoever it was stood up and walked for the first time. And so from that point, humanity spread all over the globe from that one place. And so if Africa is the cradle of humanity, then each of us is part of the story of the African diaspora. This is a face-to-face pages from the fundraising book. And we worked with Susman Prasian Company out of Culver City, California on this. And right here, you can't really see it. This is a mirror panel. So when you get to this point, just 2 pages into the book, and you read that, and you look, and you see your face, and realize that everyone is part of the African diaspora. The themes were origins, movement, transformation, and adaptation. Those were the stories that we wanted to say, to tell. The site is tremendous. This is the Yerba Buena section of San Francisco, which I'd say 20, 25 years ago was just desolate. I mean, it was Skid Row. Nothing but dilapidated buildings, but in the heart of San Francisco. And so this long process of revitalizing it is now finishing up. This is one of the last buildings built in Yerba Buena Gardens. And our site is right here on the corner of 3rd and Mission Street. Taking a aerial view, you'll see the Moscone Center here. No, here, the Moscone Convention Center. This is the Metreon, Moscone Metreon Center. Yerba Buena Gardens, Yerba Buena Center for the Performing and Visual Arts. This is Mario Bota's San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And our project was part of a development deal with between the city and the developer of this 5-star hotel condominium tower, the St. Regis Museum Tower. And so when I got involved, all they knew was that there was some space in the building, portions of 3 floors, that was going to be some kind of a cultural facility. What, we didn't know yet. And so the context was a terrific opportunity in this very vibrant, redeveloped area of San Francisco. It's very culturally diverse. This is a view of that tower designed by SOM, by the way. We didn't do the tower. It would have been nice, but we did not. Part of that project was to restore and retain the Williams Building, which is a historic structure here on the corner. So we're looking toward the Museum of Modern Art here at the tower. This is the entrance to the hotel. And this is Mission Street cutting through. So if you turn and look back the other way on Mission, you'll see that our portion of the project has its own identity and own entrance off of Mission Street. And then here's the Boca project again. The hotel and condos are entered cat-corner from our entrance. And so we started with this is sort of the blank slate. This is what SOM had decided would be the cultural component long before we were involved. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that changing the architecture to something different from the sort of egg crate vocabulary to a more jewel-like curtain wall, exposing perhaps some stairs here. And we thought that was a fairly good move, but it needed more. It needed more. If it was going to really express what this museum was about. One of the challenges that we saw immediately was, we have this jewel box, but you also have these 3.5-foot square columns crashing through the space, and it's really out of scale with this notion of a small boutique type museum. And what are you going to do about these enormous columns? And how can you make the stair or escalator, whatever it would be, lighter, more open, and so forth. Those were the beginnings of some of the challenges, or let's call them opportunities, of this project. Another constraint was that the 3 floors of the museum were different sizes, different heights. We have the most height on the first floor, but the smallest footprint. We have the biggest footprint, the lowest ceiling height on the 3rd floor, and somewhere between the second. So allocating space on these different floor plates, different configuration that was not our choosing, was predetermined, was a challenge as well. And this was the final sort of space diagram. It shows the funky shape of 3 different floors, and the fact that we have the smallest footprint where we needed the most space. Kind of similar to Maryland, isn't it? Where you want all these things on the ground floor, but you can't fit them. And so that vertical movement, once again, becomes a really important aspect of the design. In plan, on that first floor, there was an angled indentation to the main entry. And we picked up on that angle and decided to play that up and to exaggerate that angle. And begin to try and announce to the street that something very special is going on inside. No, it's not a retail establishment, it's not an office building. It's something that you really need to check out because it's very special. We wanted that really to come out onto the street and make a statement. So we designed this orange canopy, which is a double cantilever coming through the curtain wall. Now, mind you, the curtain wall had already been designed by SOM and engineered. It hadn't been installed yet. So we had to re-engineer all of this to make sure that looked like it was floating and to get the effect we were looking for. Now, to solve the problem with the columns, we decided to cover them up and to begin to have the theme of the museum projected out onto the street in the face of an African child. And that face is pixelated so that from a distance you read the child's face, but close in, each one of those constituent pixels is an individual image from the African diaspora. There's a call for submittal of photographs from around the country telling the story of the African diaspora. So it gives meaning to that movement vertically through the space as well. The other thing covering up those columns does for us is allow us, once again, to control natural light. Even though this is north facing, even the diffused light can be of detriment to certain displays and artifacts. And so this is a picture actually taken on the stair. Each one of these pixels is an image from helping to tell the story of the African diaspora to blow that up. It's not a new idea, but in this scale, in this context, we felt it would be very powerful. This is a one single still image from a full motion animated walkthrough that we contracted to help show the client the concept and what we're trying to do. Part of it was really minimalizing the stair. The stair is actually made from folded steel plates that are cantilevered from that structure behind the face, so that there's no visible means of support for that stair once you're in the building and on it. It's cantilevered out. This is an actual photograph from the street, and it held pretty true to our concept in the computer-generated image. Another thing we did working with the graphic designer was to, and you can see it just a bit here, but to define the word diaspora along the street. So even if you weren't thinking of going in, you might be attracted and you might get interested in going in by reading this definition of diaspora as you go down Mission Street. And you can see how the cantilever really does begin to engage folks at the street level. Very shallow curved depth here. And from the other direction. Now that first floor was very tight. You can see how small it is. One of the ways we leveraged the space was to use the additional height and create a frieze that began to define the four themes of the museum. Origins, movement, adaptation, and transformation. So those four themes are introduced in graphics and in text. And it's a way to get more content on that very small footprint without taking up floor space. Remember I said that retail has to be near the entrance. That was a must. And so there it is. And the first dynamic exhibit that we have is this map. Right now, all the lights are lit up showing the globe. And when this exhibit starts, and you're standing there watching it, there's one dot of light, and you can't discern any map or anything. And that dot begins to grow in the pattern of migration from Africa out, populating the entire planet. And it happens roughly at the same scale and time frame as the African diaspora spread across the globe. Simultaneously, there are panels that offer video to support that and text along with it. So you begin with origins. That's the first theme. And you go up the stair and begin to look at the images there. Looking back the other way, you see movement and adaptation. And the view from the stair. There's a key image, and if you were one of the people that actually submitted photographs, you can find where your images are in this mosaic and try and seek them out. In order to generate a similar experience for physically impaired people, this is reduced in the elevator, so folks riding the elevator can get a similar experience. Of course, there are also conventional type exhibit spaces as well, multifunctional spaces. This project was an AIA Design Award winner, and the offices continue on third floor here for the administrative staff of the museum. I'm going to show you a project now. The last one is actually under construction. Similar ethnically themed museum, the African American Cultural Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. This one had some really unique challenges as well. This is downtown Charlotte, and Wachovia Bank is a huge bank that's based in Charlotte, and they're building a 50-story tower on this site, which includes condominiums, retail, other cultural venues, there's an auditorium there, performance space, the convention center. The convention center is being built here. The NASCAR museum is here. The Charlotte Bobcats Arena is there. That's your NFL stadium, and then the CBD, the Central Business District. Our site was this leftover strip of 60 feet by 400 feet. This is sounding like a broken record, but we really had to talk our client into why this would be a great site, because it really is a leftover throwaway piece of land. What it's used for is to ramp down to about 8 levels of parking below grade under this huge facility here. So cars come in the middle of the site, ramp down, and trucks come in at this end and ramp down. And our clients were like, wait a minute, how could you build a museum on this? It's crazy. There were other alternative sites throughout the city, but we felt that this was a great site. Why? You see the freeway here, it's almost like a billboard. Any building here is going to have tremendous visibility. We like the notion of being in the mix of a lot of new things happening. There are condos here, there's a lot of activity at the stream level. We just thought it would be great. We just had to figure out how do you do a museum or a cultural center in a strip that's 60 by 400. And we'll show you how. This is a block diagram. Here's our site, the tower, and Wachovia development here. And one of the things that we did first was to research that part of the city and the African American community. And what we found is really a similar story that you see all along the East Coast, where in the urban areas, you often had, before desegregation, you had the black community and then you had the white community, generally speaking. And the black community was fairly well self-contained. You had schools, hospitals, movie theaters, hotels, all of that, because there weren't any other alternatives, and it was a really thriving community. But then in the 60s, what happened? Urban renewal, and slowly, in some cases very quickly, these communities were leveled, highways were put in, infrastructure projects. But there's a rich history. What we found out is that the site that I just showed you was right in the heart of this traditional black community that had disappeared 20 or 30 years earlier. And we wanted to find a way to memorialize that and to make this new facility that is about African American culture harken back to some of the history of that very important part of Charlotte. And in digging into this, we found that there was a school there. Went from kindergarten on up through high school. All the kids went there. And it was called the Myers School. And during graduation and other important events, all the people would come out onto the fire escapes and get their picture taken. And it was nicknamed Jacob's Ladder School. Jacob's Ladder School. And Jacob's Ladder, of course, is a biblical reference to that. But there's also the embedded meaning that the way to advance is through education. Education was very important to these communities. And so we see this Jacob's Ladder idea. We wanted to find a way to acknowledge the community that was there before, maybe use this remnant and this idea of Jacob's Ladder in the new design. Wouldn't that be a great way to try and fold that in? We also wanted to look at the tradition of quilting in the African American community, and also African textile patterns. These are 2 or 3 of about 20 ideas. that we were looking at. That we finally focused in on African textiles, quilting, and Jacob's ladder as ways of imbuing some meaning into the skin of this building and making it something more than just a pretty envelope for the program. Back to the practical problem of a 50-foot wide building on a 60-foot wide site. Here's your car entry here, right now. Here's your truck entry. All right, and so you've got to enter at the ends. Two car ends, and you've got to go up. Can you guess what we're doing with that? Jacob's ladder. And so you come up from the two ends and you arrive at the lobby space here. The escalators on this side of the stairs. So you come up and then we try and use as much depth as we can get with the little we have for main assembly space, the gallery space, and we lined up the utilities, the stair, elevator, toilets are on this back wall because that's going to be a party wall. When the adjacent site is developed, you won't have any windows there. So let's line up all the support functions there. And creating an atrium with bridges flying through it. And then once you get to the third floor, you can use the full depth of that building to capture reasonably proportioned spaces for galleries. And then at the top, we feature a rooftop restaurant and seating area. You've got classroom function and boardroom, and then office and support there. And then you can see once again the line of support functions at the top on that party wall. Some of the sketches, thinking about how to skin this building. One of the ideas was we were going to take the street pattern from the old neighborhood. It's actually called Brooklyn section of Charlotte, and then superimpose that on a perforated metal skin. That idea came when we thought it was intriguing. So I'm showing you some of the process and thoughts that went into it. Then we began to think about that quilting idea and the African textiles, and then understanding that a lot of the space would not want or need light. And certainly you need it at the offices and the atrium to provide a metal rain screen that will allow you to simulate through woven fabric, metal fabric, this quilting idea. The ends are very short, and so how do you terminate one material to the next at the ends? And that party wall will not have glass, but we thought that it would be good to animate that in some way. And so in a very inexpensive way, we can begin to introduce lighting elements that would carry that quilting pattern around the back and create more interest than just a concrete wall, party wall. And then continuing to model this idea in 3 dimensions. And this is how the building is coming out of the ground now. With the allusion to Jacob's ladder, the quilting, the observation area at the top, in the context of downtown Charlotte. This is won an AIA Design Award in the unbuilt category for our state chapter of the AIA. There's the Wachovia. I'm going to use this. That's the Wachovia Tower and all the development goes along with that. And that party wall facing downtown, there's the light feature that brings life and animation to that side of the building. This is a 5-star hotel. Finally, and then I'll close, we've just been selected as the architect for the National Center for Rhythm and Blues in Philadelphia. We're thrilled about that. I'm from Philadelphia originally. I grew up with the music, and I'm really looking forward to carrying out that commission. And then even more recently, our firm, in association with Davis Brody Bond of New York, has been selected to do the pre-design and programming work for the National Museum of African American History and Culture on the mall, the last buildable site on the mall in Washington, D.C., right next to the Washington Monument. Tremendous site and opportunity for us. And this is the Freelon Group. It's a collaboration. I'm standing here as one individual, but I work with all these wonderful people who, some of them decided to come all the way to North Carolina to work with us, and we're doing work all over the country. And thank you for listening, and we'll bring up the lights and try and answer any questions you might have. Dean, I was told to finish up about 5:45. It's 22, so trying to manage the time. Questions? Okay. Yes.
I noticed you have really great photographs.
Yes.
You have really great photographs of your buildings, and you incorporate photography and graphics into the designs as well. I wonder if you can speak towards your ideas of graphics and photography.
Well, it goes back to how many of you know who Ray and Charles Eames are? Charles and Ray Eames. If you don't know, look them up. My view is that architecture and graphics and design and photography and film are all the same thing, part of the same thing. I taught photography, I've studied it, and so we have a full-time graphic designer on staff who's trained as an architect. She does wonderful graphics for us. And quite often, if you think about it, the first impression that you make with a client or potential client is that piece of paper that you send in a proposal, or the web page, or something that's graphic even before you get in front of them. The first impression is something they're reading on a screen on a piece of paper. And I think it's extremely important that you display excellence throughout all that you do, not just the building, but how you describe it and how you document it. Yeah.
This is kind of a nuts and bolts question, sorry. But I noticed that the budget seemed to be increasing the buildings from the very early work to some of the later work that you're showing. And I wonder if you could speak to how you approach as a design for projects that have maybe lower budgets or not the budget that you hope for.
Well, the last project I showed you, the one in Charlotte, actually has a very tight budget, different from Maryland and San Francisco with higher budgets. We work very hard at the beginning of a project to define those parameters. And so we feel like we can do an excellent job regardless of the budget. It's just another constraint. It's another challenge. And sometimes it's more difficult to deal with the additional dollars because there are more choices. And so we don't shy away from projects that have a lower budget. A lot of our university work has very pedestrian budgets. We certainly strive to do the best we can within those constraints. I do have to say that working on the Maryland project and having the resources to do some of the things we did there with granite, and metal panels, and so on, it is refreshing when you can get those kind of commissions, but they don't come every day. So, does that answer your question? Yes.
It was very good to see the array of work. I hadn't seen the last building. When you were dealing with narrative, even back to the Bunny project, or the kind of translation of an idea, how do you ensure, what kinds of discussions take place in the office so that you're not making a kind of cartoon representation of identity or reifying or making static sort of cultural references?
Yeah, that's a good question. What we do is engage the exhibit design firm. We're not exhibit designers, we're architects, and so in all these projects there's an exhibit design entity and that's their specialty. And what we try and do is get them on board at the very beginning so that decisions about the partee, even citing the building, all those are informed with that kind of notion of how do we tell the story is already part of the discussion process from very, very early on. And you know, the text and how it's placed, you know, a lot of time and attention is given to that to avoid just what you're saying, being cavalier or cartoonish about conveying the messages. So the way we handle it is we get those experts in immediately, and it's brought back to the collaboration piece. You know, we're not on a pedestal as the architects and you stuff the exhibits in later. We want to work hand in hand with those other disciplines from the very beginning. Other questions? Yes.
I'm actually kind of curious to know about the process that goes into selecting the materials of your projects. I noticed that there's a wide array of different colors and different palettes in each project. So I'm just kind of curious to see how much discussion goes into within your firm, what materials are appropriate to what you're trying to convey with your concept.
Good. First of all, you'll notice we're not afraid of using color, bold color. And that's kind of a personal choice, and maybe a cultural choice. We like to make it funky, make it a little bit vibrant. And those discussions happen early on as well. One of the materials I didn't mention in the Museum of the African Diaspora is we picked a wood. The wood material is called anagray, and it's from Africa. It's not an endangered species, but it is from the continent. So we try and give meaning. Black granite, you know, it was a conscious choice of trying to represent, you know, breaking that mold and having an intervention through kind of a staid, tried and true material and introducing something a little bit more dynamic in the curve. So yes, I mean, there are thousands of decisions that go into these projects, and we like to think we are giving each and every one thought and are linking those decisions together. Yes.
I was wondering if that was also the first time I've seen anything or heard about the R&B museum. So I was wondering if you could let us in on some of the design elements you think that are going to go into the R&B museum Philly, and how you're going to, because well, you also have that quote, architecture and music.
Architecture is frozen music.
Yeah, frozen music. So this would be like, I think, would epitomize how you can put that into a structure. I was wondering if you could let us in on what you're going to do with that.
Well, if you recall, the process involves full collaboration of the owner. So if I were to tell you this is my idea and having started the process, it doesn't quite work in the way we go about it. But I can say that, you know, one of our points that we stressed during the interview that I thought was key for us is the link of architecture and music. Because I'm married to a musician. We've been talking about it for 28 years we've been married, about how architecture and music work together. And for me, you know, music has a certain structure to it, right? I mean, there's a beat, and architecture has a structure. But I think what we do is more like jazz music, where yes, there's a structure, but there's room for improvisation and for, you know, creative exploration as you move through it, as opposed to symphonic music, which is very highly structured and prescriptive. Still beautiful. This isn't a value judgment. But, you know, if you're talking about music, which is in the jazz idiom or even rhythm and blues, there's that aspect of spontaneity, of improvisation, that I think can be expressed in architecture as well. Yeah, there's a leader, there's a band leader, but the members of the ensemble are given the space and time to communicate with each other and to create spontaneously. So in that sense, that's kind of what we talked about at the interview, and I think really struck a chord with the decision makers, and I would explore that same thing. And there's another quote that I'll give you, and it's by Charles Mingus. Does anybody know who Charles Mingus is? All right, he's a famous jazz bassist. And what Charles said is making the simple complex is commonplace. Making the complex simple, that's creativity. And so in music and in architecture, we strive to take these very complex problems and find the simplest solution. Is it easy? No. Is it simple? The solution's not simple. I mean, the process isn't simple, but it ought to be clear. At the end of the day, the idea ought to come through, right? It ought to be clear enough and simple for someone to understand. Thank you.